The cotton flower. My kingdom, surrounded by countless mountains, dense forests, and abundant water resources, is in a delicate situation. In such a country, not even a drop of water must flow into the ocean without being useful to man. Parakramabahu, king of Sri Lanka, A.D. 1153 to 1186. He came awake with a start, and clearly heard the sound of water dripping. He had said 1,000 times that if a tap was opened, it should be closed tightly after use. Did anyone listen to him? Water was to him as life-giving as his own breath. Gunasingam considered gold and water to be on par. He had been working with the Water Resources Department of the Gazira Irrigation Project for the past 12 years. It was a post of much responsibility, as his office was to manage the water distribution of a country that had to struggle for every drop of water it received. He had grown up in Jaffna, Sri Lanka, a town which did not have a single river. He sharpened his water conservation skills in his father's banana plantation, where every drop of water from the well had to be conserved to survive. That experience came in handy in his water distribution job. According to the agreement with Egypt, Sudan could retain 20 billion cubic meters of water, but had to let the rest flow into Egypt. The conserved water then had to be cleverly distributed to different areas of Sudan, according to the specific needs of farmers growing various crops, like cotton, wheat, maize, and so on. Gunasingam performed his task of water management, practically the lifeline of the country, very efficiently, designing subtle methods to improve distribution. None could equal him when it came to reaping great rewards from minimal inputs. He got up from his bed at the stroke of 5, when his wife and daughter were still deep in slumber. He busied himself getting ready, going through his morning ablutions. Even at that early hour, the heat was pronounced. In a few more hours, there would only be hot water coming out of the taps. If the overhead tank got heated up, cold water would be an impossibility. He liked his morning routine in a certain order. It was his habit to fill a mug with water and use it for shaving. He never let the tap run while he shaved. He had calculated precisely the quantity of water conserved by that method. Though he liked to take showers, he avoided doing so. He washed himself in 2 buckets of water, happy to economize. This was a source of embarrassment to his wife, who often teased him about it. He never ate anything at home in the morning, and was the first to reach the office at exactly 7 o'clock. He had his breakfast at 10 when Abdullah brought him his fatur, after which he again plunged into his work. For the past few days, something had been bothering him. He had never minded being branded a miser or a tight-fisted man. What he could not tolerate was their laughing behind his back. Didn't they know the difference between being thrifty and being miserly? Was it miserliness to see to it that public resources were not wasted? He distributed several million cubic meters of water a day, but when he let a poor old woman have an infinitesimal quantity of water, they dragged him through an inquiry commission. Gunasingam was one of 24 engineers brought from Egypt to Sudan on assignments. The others were all white men, and they returned to their country after completing the work, but Gunasingam stayed on. He loved his job. It was the biggest irrigation project in the world, and covered 2.5 million acres of land that formed a triangle between the Blue Nile and the White Nile. To go from one end of the project site to the other took him 2 days by jeep. 80% of Gazira's crop was cotton, and it brought much-needed foreign exchange to the country. Gunasingam came out in the clothes he wore to work. The sun had begun to scorch. He had taken to wearing a long, loose robe called a jellaba that the Sudanese wore. He found it convenient to wear, but it did not really suit his short stature. His voice was high-pitched, and when he tried to shout, he ended up screeching like a sparrow. His voice was perhaps one of the reasons why nobody at the office paid him much respect, even though he was seen as the expert, doing important work that nobody else could do. When he came out, he saw Kafir sitting there, reciting the Koran. As usual, he had watered the flowering trees with his master's used bath water. Gunasingham was the only man to include a cotton tree in his garden along with the roses. In his view, the cotton flower was the simplest and humblest flower in the world. When he was a boy, he never could bring himself to keep on walking past a cotton tree blossom. He would stand for hours, admiring the beauty of cotton whenever it was in flower. He liked the tree because it was a conservationist, like him. It was a very thrifty plant that took in very little and gave back in abundance. It consumed limited quantities of water and converted all into white flowers. It had clothed mankind for more than 5,000 years. He went to work and back in a Volkswagen, a 20-year-old vehicle on its last legs, or tires. The roads of Sudan were crowded with Toyotas, Nissans, and Hondas of different colors. The high officials drove only Mercedes-Benz cars. In such a milieu, he was the only one, with his professional status, who owned a sparrow's nest of a car. All the young engineers who joined the organization after him went about in flashy cars. His car engine leaked copiously in one place. Kafir bent down and dexterously removed the tin that had been placed below to collect the leaking oil. Gunasingham reversed his car and turned it around. All the people in the streets of Jeddah heard the dub-dub sounds that heralded the beginning of life in the car. The highway ran straight ahead without a single curve. He passed many lines of camels walking toward the Omdurman fair. Vendors stacked watermelons by the roadside and sold them to shouts of, "Tadir! Tadir!" He wondered if there were enough people in the country to consume all those fruits. Girls in blue dresses and white veils were going to school in groups. They had tucked one end of the veil under their left arm, brought it over their heads, and left the other end dangling free. They were almost like the girls of his motherland, and looked beautiful. His daughter must have woken up too, stretching and yawning, and begun her preparations to go to school. If the judgment in his case did not go in his favor, her education in this country would come to an end. She had only one more year to finish high school. There was not much to say about his wife. Theirs had been an arranged marriage, so he had no expectations of floods of love drowning him. She had begun to observe the Savitri fast since full moon of the previous month of Ani. That was a shortcut she had discovered to keep widowhood at bay. He wondered what had prompted this sudden change in her. The office was sleeping peacefully. The moment he spotted his master, Abdullah brought him tea. He was the Mursal assigned to Gunasingham and the only loyal servant he had had. He cut his used envelopes into uniform strips, turned them upside down, and placed them on the table. Gunasingham used them to write short notes. He could not bear to waste even a scrap of paper. He felt Abdullah had also been ignoring him of late, ever since the investigations had been initiated. Such a trifling matter it had been, and yet they caught hold of it and held him in a vice. The Commission of Inquiry's report was expected to be discussed on that day's board meeting. Though Gunasingham had been distributing water in a most equitable manner, he had one unfulfilled desire. He wanted, somehow, to introduce his drip irrigation method to a country like Sudan, where there was an acute water shortage. Buckling down to his persistent nagging, they had changed over to the new irrigation method in an area of 2,000 acres. The pilot project successfully proved that with 1/10 of the water, he could double the produce. Appreciation came from all quarters, yet the apprehension that the procedure could leave thousands jobless made them shelve the project. It was true that he had established the efficiency of the drip irrigation system, but the chairman did not approve of his harping on the subject. It added to the head's consternation that his subordinate was being overly praised for his skill in water distribution. As a result, some of the work in the area of water distribution was taken away from Gunasingham. He gritted his teeth and put up with the humiliation. The authorities transferred Gunasingham to a new area in the department, where he had the responsibility of constructing 50 miles of canals during that year. It was while working on this project that Gunasingham slipped up a little. In that uninhabited expanse of desert where he worked, an old woman lived with poverty as her only companion. She walked 2 miles every day to fetch water. He was moved by the sight of the suffering old woman fighting for survival all alone. She was a displaced person who had fled her village, unable to bear the fierceness of the war that raged in the south. She had lost all her possessions and had walked hundreds of miles. She was now fighting her last lonely battle. At first look, the old woman looked a lot like Pamia, dried okra, with her dank, lean body and tall figure. Her age might have been anything from 50 to 100. Her face was crisscrossed by lines like the Gezira railroad map. Her appearance touched a chord in Gunasingham. Perhaps he remembered someone from his own village, too. He began to call her Ediram, grandmother. His heart softened listening to the old woman's story. He made a decision his conscience endorsed. He moved the canal they had been constructing a little way from the path specified in the original plan and brought it closer to the old woman's hut. Thanks to that alteration, the woman had easy access to water. When the canal work was finished, the woman held his hands and thanked him profusely. Her gesture moved him deeply. He did not expect such copious tears to flow from the old woman's dried-up eyes. He felt an inner peace, as if an old debt of his, carried over from a previous birth, had finally been settled. Then, a new problem arose. His canal-building project went over budget, with a 16% increase. He was asked to show cause for the deviation. It was not unusual for queries like these to be raised and explanations offered for them. It was his reply that was unusual. He wrote back, stating the facts as they were, and the authorities were stunned. Nobody expected to get such an honest reply. For the first time in the history of the administration, a commission of inquiry was set up to look into the case. The other engineers who worked with him offered advice. They asked him to show that the error had been committed because of certain discrepancies in the map plan. Others suggested he say that the detour had to be made because of the presence of an unexpected rock formations found on the path. He refused to do any of that. He was questioned at length by the commission, and he looked straight at the members and spoke. "Sir, I saw with my own eyes the horror of having to travel 2 miles for water. She was old and infirm. She could have been the mother of any one of us here. I could not bear to see an old woman struggle, and that's why I diverted the canal a little off course. Was that a grave mistake? My eyes get their fill of happiness today when I see the cotton crop the woman has cultivated. The cotton blooms smiles, like the old lady herself. The canal has given sustenance to a destitute woman, abandoned even by the gods." The moment of decision was fast approaching. It was 9 o'clock. The committee members were arriving, one by one. He was on familiar terms with all of them. That day they passed him hastily, as if they didn't see him. He wanted very much to go and see Ediram. His instincts told him he might not get another opportunity to see her. Before he knew it, he was walking to the car. There was calm in his haste. Only after his car came to life with thunderous noises did he realize that many eyes were on him. They were surprised to see him go somewhere in his car at that hour when the board was meeting. He drove straight to Adhiram's hut. He hoped his tension might ease a bit if he saw her. Adhiram was delighted to see him. The cotton plants had grown tall and were covered with bunches of flowers. As far as his eyes could see, the plants filled the area and looked like 1,000 women bent down, their heads adorned with white flowers. Would anyone believe that this place had been an arid land a few months ago? When the winds blew in spirals, the cotton plants swayed slightly and fanned away the heat. The old woman's face was as happy as a young girl's. "What is it, Walde? Why does your face look so sad?" Adhiram brought some kekadeh for him to drink, well sweetened with Kanana sugar. The woman had never before addressed him as Wadi, meaning dear son. The endearment had its effect on him. He had seen bullocks shiver with pleasure when he rubbed on their backs. Gunasingham felt a similar shiver at the touch of the word Wadi. He felt like crying his heart out. He felt peaceful at the same time. He took leave of the old woman knowing it was the last time, and went back to his office. 4 years earlier they had, by mistake, ordered a pesticide that was unsuitable, and at that an entire year's supply. Only after the consignment arrived did they become aware of the mistake. The authorities hushed it up and wrote off millions. He wondered how they explained away that misadventure. When he returned to his office, all eyes were on him. He knew for certain what the outcome would be, but still his mind was in turmoil. His stomach seemed to be rising up to choke his throat. The chairman of the board called him in to address him. "The sad duty of informing you of the board's decision has been entrusted to me," he began. Gunasingham saw only the lips of the man move. The lips expanded, growing bigger and bigger, to fill the entire room. He did not hear a single word after that. Time went by. Everyone in the room was looking at him. A tense silence prevailed, and the chairman asked him again, "Do you wish to say anything?" "Sir, what can I say? I've spent a major portion of my life in the service of this organization. 11 of you have jointly made a decision. That decision must be the correct one. If this job were to be entrusted to me one more time, I would still do the same thing. Over the past several years, I have never cheated. I have never embezzled. I have never lied. All I did was give an old woman water. I thought my job was to distribute water. If that was a grave mistake, I would like to continue to make such mistakes, especially now that I see every drop of water I gave her has blossomed into cotton flowers." His tongue faltered even as he said these words. His throat tightened, and he simply walked out of the room. The sun was fierce. The heat of his emotions also tortured him. After finishing all his little undone jobs for the day, Gunasingham cleared his table. A couple of people came and offered their sympathies. They were sad to see him go. When he had tied all his personal belongings with a rope, Abdullah brought the bundle on his head. He remembered to put into the car the scraps of envelopes that he had so meticulously cut. Abdullah's eyes were red when he took leave of his master, saying, "Ma salama." Gunasingham, his eyes directed toward the ground, got into the car and drove home. The dust storm that had been brewing from that morning swelled and threatened. Not minding it, he drove fast. He wondered how a tortoise could be made to run at a speed of 60 miles an hour. His car went at the speed it found comfortable. A huge sandstorm began. The wind that blew ferociously in spirals flung a sand screen into the sky that hid the whole world. At first, all the vehicles tried to crawl through, but soon came to a complete stop. However many times he had experienced a sandstorm, terror had him in its grip every time he went through it. Gunasingham switched on the lights and parked his car to one side. A camel driver sat beside him with his camel. He removed the imah cloth tied around his head, covered his mouth, nose, and ears with it, and sat under the camel. The camel was not worried. It looked relaxed, as if it was sitting under the shade of a tree enjoying a breeze. Covering its eyes with its long, thick lashes and its nostrils with the built-in membranes inside it, it looked at peace with the world. The car was coated all over with dust. Nothing was visible. The frenzy of the storm subsided in an hour as suddenly as it had started, and the vehicles began to crawl out one by one. He got out of his car, cleaned the windows, and set off once more. He marveled at the wonder of how the roads had, in a few minutes, become completely strewn with the branches of trees, twigs, rooftops, and garbage. He came home an hour earlier than usual, and Kafir was nowhere to be seen. He got down, opened the gate himself, drove the car in, and parked it. He put the tin can under the car, making sure it was at the right place where the oil dripped. He opened the front door with his key. A sand-filled gunny bag, lodged to keep the storm at bay, barred the entranceway. He slowly wormed his leg inside, removed the bag, went in, and sat on a chair. He placed his hands on his knees, straightened his neck, and looked up. His wife and daughter were nowhere to be seen. A sound came from the bathroom, and it was the sound of water running. The mother must be washing the daughter's hair with henna. The uproar accompanying the ritual of hair washing continued. "Wash quickly, girl. Appa will come any time now and shout at you for wasting water." Water was noisily going down the drain, a sound that was anathema to his ears. He closed his ears with both hands and looked out the window. Thanks to the tyranny of the storm, his cotton tree had been bathed in sand, and now stood weak and tired. It had flowered early, before its time. Even as he watched, a wisp of cotton disengaged itself, and, blown by the wind, soared higher and higher.